Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinzler, a lifelong gardener in the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. And I should add, Don Kinzler, Best Columnist nominee for the 2023 Forum Best of the Red River Valley Readers Poll. So all of you listeners out there, you can log into inform.com, look for the Best of the RRV trophy icon at the top left corner of the page, go to the Arts and Entertainment section, and vote for Don as the best columnist and this show as the best podcast. Don, what do you think about all that?
Well, that's exciting. That's wonderful.
It is fun.
Yeah, well, it just goes to show, too, how many people enjoy. You know, we're all in this together. And this gardening, and it just shows how many people are interested in this.
And it's always fun because you and I like this because we get to sit down and we get to talk to each other about something that we like, a mutual interest, which is gardening. Sometimes we have really fun guests in too, to kind of this. So it's kind of a conversation for us. So it's really great to hear that people like tuning in to listen to that people can get some information out of that. It's really fun.
It is. And, you know, I truly mean that. You know, we're all in this together. And so I like even the name of the podcast and the garden column, Growing Together.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, it is. You know, we're all one kind of big, one happy gardening family.
Yeah. Speaking of gardening and growing together, where did the vegetables go to have a drink?
I don't know. Let's see. Where did the vegetables go to have a drink?
Well, the salad bar.
Well, of course.
Makes sense.
Yes. Dad jokes are us.
Dad jokes, yes, exactly. We have them. We have a bounty of them. That is what we are harvesting every week is some gardening dad jokes.
That's awesome.
Well, you know, so here we are. We're facing the first day of fall. We're recording this just before the first day of fall, which is September 23rd. So unfortunately, we need to talk about what to do in your garden to get ready for that dreaded W word, winter. First of all, before we even get into this, I have a question for you. This is a personal question.
Sure, what's that?
From my garden. I still have a lot of tomatoes on the vine that are still green. Is there any chance that they're going to turn, or should I just pull them and try to do something else to kind of force a ripening there?
Well, of course, we all look so forward to tomatoes all season long, and so it's hard to let go.
Yeah.
And one advantage so far this year, knock on some wood, is that it looks like the forecast is going to be relatively warm for this time in September. Even going into early October, it looks like the forecast is a little warm, which is nice. Because if we started getting chilly temperatures down into the 30s, or even high 30s, even if we don't have frost, that really affects tomatoes. You know, tomatoes are a warm-loving crop, and if the fruit are ripening during chilly temperatures, the flavor just isn't as good. Ever notice that? Sometimes the last tomatoes of the season, if they're ripening when it's chilly, they just don't taste quite as good, maybe more watery and etc. But since we're having warm temperatures, the tomatoes that are on the vine that are green are going to continue to ripen quite normally. Now, that does bring up the good question, though. Okay, fine, we're going to have tomatoes that will continue to ripen. What if at some point, not if, but when, frost is forecast and you still have some big tomatoes on, can we bring those in? Will they continue to ripen? And the answer is yes, if they've reached full size. They aren't going to, if they're not full size green, then they aren't going to continue to ripen. So the first step in determining what tomatoes to bring in would be, are they full size? And in fact, to know that they're full size, if they started to get that little bit of a blush pink, you know, a little bit of color forming, then you know that that's a full size and they're going to continue to ripen in stores. So the way to do that is to pick them and bring them in and put them between layers of newspaper in a box. They don't need to be on a sunny window.
Okay.
But they tend to ripen better in a single layer with newspaper. And of course, if newspaper isn't available, because print is becoming a little harder to find, isn't it? And so if you don't have newspaper, a grocery bag, paper grocery bag works well. What that does is it traps the ripening gas, the natural ripening gas called ethylene, that traps that in that layer and helps stimulate ripening.
So do you want that do you want them still to get some sun? Because traditionally we put them on the windowsill thinking that they'll still get the sun and that'll help ripen them. So if we put them in a box, do we still want them close to getting some sunshine?
No, at that point they don't need the sunshine any longer. So the ethylene gas trapped in there is a better ripening inducer than the sunlight on the windowsill. So they'll actually ripen better in that kind of slightly closed in. I should mention too that even though the temperatures are going to stay warm, tomatoes will continue to ripen. There are going to be on some of the tomatoes, especially the indeterminate type that continue vining and all that, there are going to be lots of little tomatoes or blossoms or new growth that has no chance of ripening. Okay. So at this point of the year, it's just as, in September here, late September, to cut off all the blossoms, the little tomatoes, anything that's not going to make it, and allow that energy to go into ripening the tomatoes that will make it, that do have a chance. So even though temperatures are going to be warm, anything that's less than maybe egg size or golf ball size probably isn't going to make it. So that could just be cut off and let the bigger ones that are going to make it, let those get the energy.
Well, what about one? This is one that you turned me on to a couple of years ago, sun sugars. Small tomatoes, they're still producing. And so there are some that are probably full sun sugar. They're the size that they should be, still green. Should I leave those and see what happens?
Yeah, I'd leave them on as long as the temperatures are going to remain consistently warm. But if we start getting temperatures into the low 40s or upper 30s, even though it's not freezing, it's still going to affect the flavor. So at that point, if we start getting chilly evenings, I would pick off the full size, even the sun sugar. Have you enjoyed the sun sugar this year?
Oh, I loved them. And the thing is, I've brought them over to a friend's house a couple times for different dinner parties they had, and they were just astounded by them. They were just blown away. And these are people who do a lot of dinner parties. They cook a lot. They eat well. They're adventurous eaters, and they were just blown away by something so simple and so delicious as the sun sugars.
And they produce heavily. I plant one plant. We can't use them all. I've given away repeatedly. I've almost been tempted to put a sign out on the street. I have a sun sugar plant. Help yourself with an arrow pointing. Very productive.
Getting back into the ripening indoors, you're saying put them in a box with some newspaper. Do you want the newspaper fully around them or just kind of like nestled into a newspaper?
Nestled in, okay. Or on a kind of a single layer, just so that it's trapping that ethylene gas down in that layer of tomatoes.
Because the one thing that I looked this up, and so this is a word of caution, I should say, looking things up on the internet. This is why I'm asking somebody who is a seasoned gardener.
So what'd they say on the internet?
Well, they said you could put them in a brown paper bag, or put them in a paper bag,
sure,
with a banana or an apple, and that was it ethylene.
Ethylene, yeah.
That would help trap
ETH.
that in there. So it's kind of a similar theory to yours, but yours was, you didn't say to include a spare fruit.
Sure.
So
exactly.
I was wondering.
But no, that is legitimate. The banana and the apple will give off additional ethylene.
Okay.
The tomatoes themselves will give off their own and enough. For example, ripening bananas. It's a good old wisdom, which works, is to, if you have green bananas, put them in a paper bag, mm-hmm. and they'll ripen. So just the ethylene from that fruit itself will ripen. Same thing with tomatoes, the ethylene gas from that fruit itself. So there probably isn't the need to put in an additional extra fruit, but it wouldn't hurt either.
Yeah. Well, so there's an interesting harvest hack for people out there.
So it's kind of interesting when we get things off the internet. Some things have value, not all.
Yeah, there's maybe kernels of truth in there, and
isn't it a challenge to sort out what we read?
Well, so let's get into kind of what we're talking about today, which is late in the year, what do we do to prepare our yard and garden for winter?
I've got to admit, John, that I love the fall. There's colors, the sun gets a certain look on the horizon. It's beautiful. Even some of the shades of brown, and of course the fall colors, etc. And so I love the fall. But I will admit, there's a certain sense of panic that sets in, and that's our whole list that we're going to talk about is kind of why this sense of panic sets in, because the reality is starting to set in to me that, okay, the end of the growing season is coming. I've still got lots of things I want to accomplish in the garden, and so that sense of panic tells me I got to get cranking on some of these things. So some of the things we talk about today are things that, okay, maybe they would have been better done a week or two ago. Can we still do those? And so even though I'm enjoying, it's kind of a fun sense of panic as in now I got to get this stuff done because I want next year to be really, really good. And what I do this fall here kind of it greatly depends. Next year greatly depends on what I get done this fall.
And for the most part, none of these gardening chores are too strenuous. This shouldn't be.
No, and it's happy work.
Yeah, and it's look, this we've got nice weather coming up, so pick a good day and just spend the day outdoors. You'll appreciate that, and do some of these tasks.
I take vacation days to do this.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's actually one of my happier. I love our vacations. I mean, not putting down family vacations, but spending time out in the yard. I love a vacation day doing that.
That's nice. Well, so one of the things is that really, it's not too late in the year to plant, is it?
Correct. Even the end of September here, if we've got trees, shrubs, or you visit garden centers and they've got plentiful trees, shrubs, perennials, in late September here, there's time. We can get those planted because they'll have the whole month of October to root in. The soil in the Fargo area, most of North Dakota, most of Minnesota, doesn't freeze solid until some point in November. And so things that we plant now in late September will have an entire month to produce roots. So that's why my little bit of sense of panic, I want to get these things done kind of by the end of September, the planting that I want to do.
And so one of the things that you've talked about is that if you're doing something like a shrub, or if you're putting something new in there like a shrub, let's say, what you want to do too is you'll want to protect it from winter, from its first winter, even as a late plant. You'll want to put a little bit of mulch on top, right? How much mulch are we talking?
Exactly. And the reason for putting that mulch on, I indicated that these plants, trees, shrubs, perennials, will continue to root in. And a layer of mulch will help keep that soil from freezing quite as soon. And it's surprising what anywhere from about a 4-inch to a 12-inch layer of mulch will do. So rather than soil freezing down sometime the first part of November, it might not freeze down until the end of November with that mulch. And that gives an extra 2 to 4 weeks of rooting power that those plants will do. So a newly planted plant, of course, very important this time of year to water it in really good because those roots aren't going to grow out into dry soil. So make sure you give it a good, thorough soaking. And when I say a thorough soaking, almost anything we plant, a perennial, tree, shrub, needs at least about a 5-gallon bucket slowly poured over it. Perennials maybe less than a tree, but a 5-gallon bucket, maybe 2 5-gallon buckets for a tree or a shrub planted, slowly poured in. So then getting back to the mulch. Okay, mulch, probably at least a 4-inch layer. It could be wood chips. I like shredded wood products. That nestles in really good. And that would be a kind of a more permanent, that'll last quite a number of years. That'll be kind of a more permanent mulch on there. You could mulch with leaves. Dried grass clippings tend to mat and get a little bit kind of soggy, moldy, so leaves or wood chips. So at least about a 4-inch if you want to kind of keep that frost from going in quite as deeply. And but if you wanted to especially protect something like a more tender perennial, something that's a little borderline winter hardiness, such as the perennial winter hardy hibiscus. Have you ever tried those? I don't have one. That's on my wish list.
I did, and it didn't make it. So it didn't make it over winter.
Right,
so
they're definitely borderline. So that would be a good example of one to give not just a 4-inch layer of mulch, but 12 to 18 inches of mulch. So now if we use leaves, that's fine. That'll work. If we use the shredded wood product, shredded wood mulch, and mounded 12 inches over it, of course, next spring we're going to have to take that away. We could still leave about a 4-inch layer around it as the protective mulch during the growing season.
You've talked in the past even going up to 2 feet.
I have, yeah. And there's nothing, the more the better. So I would consider for borderline hardiness material, such as some of the roses.
I was going to say
some
rose
of the
bushes
roses
would be...
that aren't as hardy, some of those varieties, as well as any borderline perennials. Yeah, 12 to 24 inches.
Okay.
Really the more the better. And especially important if we get a winter with little snow cover. And of course, we never know that for sure. If we have a winter like last winter where the soil really didn't freeze much, we got early snow and it was deep and stayed. But one of these winters, we're going to have a winter that's cold, with little snow cover, and then the frost just penetrates down in, and then often you'll get freezing and thawing, a January thaw, and with no snow it can thaw the soil, freeze it, and then you get actually a heaving of the perennials where the roots tear and it gets literally heaved out of the soil. And so since we don't know what the winter is going to be, and just to protect against having an open winter with no snow. That's why it's so important to do this mulching in the fall of the year. And the mulch should really go on, well, if you're trying to keep the soil from getting frozen, then anytime in October, really, to put that mulch on. And so anyway, quite important to try to, it's hard to outguess the weather, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's better to be prepared because in January, if we have no or little snow and everything is just windswept and frigid, that's not the time to be looking for leaves or something to mount over our perennials. So a little bit of caution and planning ahead.
I'm glad you said wood chips because I usually have like a half a bag left of wood chips or something like that. I usually have something left from another landscaping project or something like that. And it's good to know because they will break down and then all that nutrients just goes into the soil. So it's a good thing. Another one that you've brought up in the past is hay. Using hay as a mulch.
Exactly. Hay makes a good mulch. Straw. Yep. And garden centers oftentimes will sell bales of straw, so that makes a great mulch as well.
Do you know if that would attract rabbits, though, or if rabbits would just eat that? Which is better that they eat that than your actual plants.
That's true. Or they might use it for nesting material, I suppose. But it seems during the wintertime, rabbits especially crave the nutrition that our apple trees and dogwoods and roses have. So I think that rabbits would probably skip by the straw or hay and go for
something that was living.
that has some nice tender. For example, there's a reason why they go after fruit trees, and rose is in the fruit family. They're all in the same family, actually the rose family. So there's something in that bark that is very sweet, makes sense, fruit, fruit tree. And so there's a reason why they go for some of those particular species.
Now, you've talked about, too, that when you're creating this building up this bed of mulch, how far out should you go? Because you said it's a good idea to extend out a little bit because that'll just add, a bigger area that you're covering is protecting the ground a little bit more, or rather, I shouldn't say protect it. It eases there won't be a sudden sharp freeze to it. It just kind of eases the ground into it. It's more of a moderates the temperature.
Good description. Yeah,
and exactly. So we should build it, like how far out should we go? Should we go
so for example, if the hardy hibiscus, which it's fun, I'm happy to see garden centers selling some of these things that are relatively new, and that winter hardy hibiscus, such big blossoms. And so anyway, a good example of how far out to protect your borderline winter hardy hibiscus. Probably at least a 2-foot diameter. I would consider kind of a minimum. If you're trying to protect something for the winter, at least 2 feet. 3 might be better, but if you can only kind of squeeze in a 2-foot circle around it, if you have other plants or something in the vicinity, you might only get 2 feet. And that, 2 feet wide at least, and anywhere from 4 to 24 inches. Again, 4 inches is going to give a little bit, but 12 to 24, much better.
And I remember reading something that you wrote a while ago, but this was that if you plan on planting late in the season, one thing you can do if you're not ready to plant yet, or if you haven't got that, if you're waiting for a shrub to be delivered, let's say, you said, go ahead and dig the hole now and prep it by mulching already over it, just to kind of keep the soil from, again, keep it kind of temperate, keep it from getting too cold, so that when you do put the plant in there, you clean out the mulch and then you can plant it in there. It's warm and ready to go, and then you can just put that mulch back over the top. I love that suggestion.
Right, and we run into that very frequently if we order tulips or other bulbs from other areas of the country, some of the national bulb companies. They sometimes forget that Fargo is chillier than Atlanta, and so the bulbs might show up on your doorstep the 1st of November, of course, even though you've maybe ordered them way in advance. Okay, so if you know you've ordered some bulbs, and they just aren't coming, at a certain point, maybe in September already here, if you've ordered them, prepare the area, as you indicated, that you're going to plant these bulbs. Spade it up, work it up really good. If it was a shrub, you dig the hole. For bulbs, you could work the soil up really good, get it ready to plant, and then put that layer of mulch over, at least 4 inches, maybe 6 inches, maybe more, and that will keep that frost from going down. Otherwise, if you don't do that and the bulbs show up November 1st, some years you can't get a shovel in the ground November 1st if it's an early, chilly, cold. There have been times when you can't dig in early November. And so that gives you time. And so then, as you say, after planting those tulip bulbs, put the mulch back on, because then that will keep the soil from freezing and it will have that rooting time that it needs.
All right. A lot of good information there. We're going to take a quick little break, and when we come back, more tips for work to do in the yard this fall to make your garden better next spring and summer.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
Okay, we're back, and we're talking about some tasks to do this in your garden and yard this fall to make your garden and yard look better in next spring and summer. And one of the big things when it comes to kind of fall cleanup is, what plants should we cut back? I think hostas are the big ones because they can be really kind of slimy next spring. But what are some of the big ones that we should really be sure to cut back?
Yeah, in the perennial garden, there are kind of two thoughts, or two schools of thought, or two ways of dealing with the perennial garden in the fall. There are longtime perennial gardeners that in the fall of the year, usually about the time we get a frost, we'll go in and just cut everything down, get it totally cleaned up, raked up, and so it goes into winter just totally clean. And that's fine. There are gardeners that have done that successfully for many, many years. But there are some schools of thought that a lot of those perennial flowers are better left intact over winter instead of cutting them back. And there's a couple of reasons for that. For one thing, I kind of enjoy looking out the window in wintertime out to our yard and looking at the perennial flowers, because some of the tops of those, the parts sticking out of the snow, are quite pretty. For example, the ornamental grass is waving in the wind. The seed heads are there. The kind of the different textures of brown, the different colors.
And you get great shadows on the white snow, too.
Yeah, they do. So actually there's beauty there to just kind of sit and look out your window and think about. I like pondering that. And some of the different perennials, for example, the giant fleece flower. That has great seed heads left up there, and it's massive. So a lot of the perennials look nice against the winter landscape. Also, there are little native pollinating bees that create their nests in hollow stems, such as in ornamental grasses and the different perennials that tend to have more of a woody structure, a sturdy structure.
Like hydrangeas?
Yeah, hydrangeas would be a good example. And so we're giving our little pollinator friends a home, and then that helps our apple trees and cucumbers to have better pollination next year. And another good example of why you might leave them, the birds can usually peck away at the seeds, so you'll have some songbirds in your yard. Most of all is that the perennials tend to overwinter better, more successfully, if, even the winter hardy types, if the tops are left intact. The reason for that is it helps catch snow. It makes kind of a snow fence right within the perennial garden. And if we have one of those open, cold winters, that I refer to every so often, we get one of those just where we don't get the insulating snow, and yet we get frigid temperatures, and that can be very hard on even winter hardy perennials. There are winters, test winters they're called, in which peonies and iris have died and hosta have died that normally are fully hardy. And so that's a risk I don't like to take. And so by leaving the tops on, it will help catch what little snow we do have during some of those winters, and just tends to moderate the perennial bed a little bit. But you mentioned some types that should be cut back in the fall of the year. And you mentioned the hosta. Yeah, by the following spring, after the hosta is just laid under the snow, they're kind of slimy and difficult to remove. They aren't creating any good structure above the snow line, and so they may as well be cut back in the fall. And the timing to cut what you do want to cut back in the fall is usually after it's had frost. Until frost, those leaves are still probably feeding the root system and putting health, good stuff, back into the roots. For example, my hosta right now in September, they've got a lot of good growth on yet, a lot of good leaves. And so those leaves are still doing their photosynthesis thing and feeding the root system for its general health. So until we get a couple of frosts that shut down the growing season, I prefer to leave them on, even the things I'm going to cut back. So another one in addition to hosta are iris, kind of the same situation. Next spring, under the snow, they're all matted down, and so it's easier to cut back the iris in the fall of the year. Same with daylilies. They tend to just plop by next spring. Peonies are best cut back for disease control. Peonies are very susceptible to foliage diseases, especially the grayish powdery mildew. And those disease spores can winter right there on the foliage or around the plant. So if we cut those back, peonies, back to about an inch above soil level and then dispose of those tops, instead of just leaving them lay. Some perennial tops you can kind of leave around if they're disease-free. You can kind of leave them around the plant, and it'll be fine. But peonies should be removed and put in the trash.
Should peonies also be cut back and wait until that first frost?
They should. Yep. Wait until that first frost, and then you're sure that the growing season is done. They aren't growing anymore. They aren't putting any more nutrition down into their root system.
And peony and the powdery mildew, that's why we make sure we don't water a peony from above on the leaves. You want to water it from the root because you'll see that.
Right, then you aren't spreading the spores around and giving a good climate for that powdery mildew. Because it's interesting, once that coating, have you ever tried washing that off of a peony or cucumber or anything else? It's that grayish powder is on there. You can't even wash it off. And of course, it makes them look pretty ragged.
Yeah. Are there any, like with that peony, when we cut that back, can we put that in, in the compost bin, even if it's got a little powdery mildew, or would we best be throwing that away?
It'd be best to throw it away. Now, I suppose if a person's compost bin rotted enough and got really hot, literally the temperature gets hot in some of those as it's fermenting, then some insects and diseases could be killed. But in most of our compost situations, where we're just kind of occasionally turning the pile, they don't get internally hot enough to kill some of the disease and insects.
What about things like the hostas, the iris, the other things to cut back, the daylilies? Are those things that, I mean, like how much, what things can we compost or should we compost? Like you're saying, some of these you can just leave right around the plant too, and they will deteriorate and they will go in and feed
They kind of work almost as a mulch.
Yeah.
You know, some of those you can, some of I guess to answer that question is as long as it's free of disease, really, as long as it didn't have mildew or during the growing season, if it didn't start browning and get kind of funny looking, as long as the foliage was healthy and just dried down by the frost, then those could really be crunched up and put either in the compost pile or just kind of distributed right around. There are different types of perennials that I've done that with, even in the springtime. When I've cut them back, if the foliage has been clean, I kind of crumble it up. I use a mulch that's a wood product mulch, but some of these kind of integrate fine in that mulch. So sometimes instead of just always hauling it away, you can use it in the mulch that you've applied.
You were saying the fleece flower you like to keep up during winter. It's got some nice winter interest, and again, it'll kind of catch some water, which will, catch some moisture and help that. That's one what about other plants that die back fully and then grow from the ground up, like bleeding heart? Those are even starting to topple, under their kind of their weight.
Yeah, and so some of those, such as the bleeding heart, would be probably a good case to remove that because there isn't really much structure that remains there. So and of course, bleeding heart tends to kind of start dying back earlier. So some of those probably just as well to remove.
Now, I think we talked about hydrangeas earlier, but I think a lot of people always wonder, is my hydrangea one that should be cut back or is it one that should be left? Does it grow on old wood or does it grow on new wood? If you don't know what kind your hydrangea is there a way of telling?
The easiest way, I think, to tell is by the flower shape, because generally the two species of hydrangea that are well adapted here, you've got the Annabelle type, that have the big rounded blossoms.
The mop heads?
The big, like the big white blossoms that can get really, really big. The other species of hydrangea that's well suited are called the panicle types. Panicle means that they have kind of a pyramidal shaped flower. And so most of those, such as vanilla strawberry, little limelight, and all of those, if you look at the flower shape, they have a kind of a roughly pyramidal shaped flower from what the species names come. But anyway, the Annabelle types with those big rounded flowers, they usually, almost always, die back to near ground level or 6 inches above ground level. And those you do cut back. Otherwise, each year would be a tangle of old dead material and new stuff trying to push through. So that type that does die down to near ground level need to be cut back each year. I prefer, again, to wait till spring. Some people cut them down in fall, but probably spring is preferred. The other type with the pyramidal-shaped flowers, they grow like what I'd call a normal shrub. A normal shrub, we don't cut them down to ground level each year because they leaf out from above. And the panicle type hydrangea does that. They leaf out from the old wood up above, and so you don't cut them all the way down each year. You just do a little light trimming. Maybe if you want, trim back some of the flower heads once they're dead. I kind of like to leave the flower heads on over winter because they tend to look pretty against the snow, those dried flower heads. Occasionally, they will bloom so heavily that the snow on those flowers might break the shrub itself. And so if that's been a problem, that would be a case for wanting to cut off those dried flowers in the fall of the year. But anyway, kind of a neat thing to examine the totally two different growth habits of hydrangea, depending the type. And again, the easiest way I can describe as to identifying between those two types is if you've got one that has the pyramidal flower clusters, then it's that panicle type that leafs out from the upper old wood that stays on year to year. The other type grows from the base. And I guess that's a good case. Sometimes I don't always get it done, but a good case for saving the plant tag. If you put it at the base of the plant, that's fine. It'll last a couple of years, but those little tags get kind of crunchy and pretty soon they break off and you lose them. So a good case for having a 3-ring binder or somewhere where you can put those plant tags in kind of pockets, little pockets to save from year to year.
Well, when I was getting my mom's house ready to sell last year, I was doing some work in her garden, and I was digging under and kind of cutting back some plants to make it look a little bit better. It kind of got overgrown. And when I was reaching in there, I pulled out the old tag that was about 12 years old.
Sometimes
and
if they're down in the soil, protected from the ultraviolet rays of the sun, sometimes they'll hold pretty good down in there. It's kind of fun to dig it up and see the actual tag. But if exposed to the sunlight, then they get kind of crunchy.
You've talked about that it's better to maybe rototill and turn the soil now in the fall than to wait until the spring. Why is that?
Well, I enjoy rototilling in the fall, and maybe I do it because I kind of enjoy it. There's something just earthy about turning over that soil, and I kind of enjoy the process of either spading or rototilling the soil. A couple of reasons why I do that, and one is I can incorporate organic matter into the soil, rototill that in, and our heavy clay soil needs organic matter. Now, there's lots of schools of thought now on no-till gardening. Of course, no-till agricultural farming has been around a long, long time. No-till works quite well, even in heavy soil. But in farming, you have air seeders and different ways that can get down into the soil to plant the seed. And of course, for gardening, we kind of don't have that. And so in heavy, heavy soil, it takes a while of no-till for that soil to become soft and work up enough. Now, there are very good gardeners who advocate completely no-till, even in heavy clay soil. And they indicate that by keeping the soil covered, like with a mulch, and even without tilling it in fall or spring, that soil will become mellow enough that you can just kind of, when you want to plant something in your garden, even a row, you could just go in with the hoe and dig your little row. And I believe that our heavy clay soil can become mellow, and sometimes turning it and rototilling it sometimes can make a heavy soil even worse. And so there's good rationale for moving towards a less tilled garden. And I'm going to try that in part of our garden.
Is there a benefit to doing now? And I'm just thinking because we've had such a dry fall to date, or I shouldn't say fall because we're not technically there yet, but the last part of summer has been very, very dry. Is there a benefit to doing it now? Is there an added benefit to doing it now while it's still so dry that it's maybe easier to work than if it were that really wet clay type?
Yeah, so a couple more reasons, one of which you bring up now, why I do rototill my garden in the fall and in the spring, because it, in my own case, my own garden, it opens up the soil in the fall here so that moisture can penetrate, and it can make the soil more workable in the spring for me. And also, another good reason for why I rototill in the fall is insects and disease organisms that might be trying to overwinter in the soil. By turning that soil over, it tends to expose the eggs of insects and diseases, and more of a chance that those insect eggs or overwintering insects might die out over winter and not come back to plague me next year. And so again, I am a garden tiller. I rototill in the fall and in the spring. But again, I do want to mention that there are very good gardeners who are successfully doing a total no-till. They don't turn the soil over at all. They use mulches over the soil surface, and the soil becomes very nice and mellow. And so I want to give good credit to that as well. And I'm going to develop more of a working knowledge of that no-till gardening also. I'm going to devote a corner of my garden to no-till.
Yeah, it'll be fun to see.
You know, one of the wonderful phrases of gardening that I love is to grow it is to know it. And so if you experience something, also experience is the best teacher. So when I say I want to have a better working knowledge of a no-till garden in a heavy soil, it means I want to gain a firsthand knowledge of that. So to grow it, I'll be able to know it better.
That sounds good. Let's take a quick little break, and when we come back, Don's number one tip, the tip that you don't want to miss if you are a homeowner for what to do this fall for your yard.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
All right, we're back, and we're talking about the tasks that you can do this fall to help you have a good start on a good yard and garden in next spring and summer. And Don, let's start off with one of your I would say this was maybe one of the most impactful tips. I saw that when you published this, people just really, really latched onto this one, and they were very excited to hear this kind of news that you put out there. And that was a couple of years ago when you wrote that you don't have to rake leaves, you can just mow over them, and that's actually beneficial for the yard.
That garden column, far and above, received more clicks, more views, multiple times than anything I have ever written.
You made so many people's lives easier, more enjoyable.
And the reason I wrote that article was because there was research done that came out of Ohio State, and it was done over multiple seasons, in which they tested to see, is there a benefit of just mowing over your leaves and mulching it down in, kind of forcing it to go down into the grass itself, or is it better to rake them off? And it was easy research to do, because, of course, research has to be done, the same soil, the same conditions, the same lawn, et cetera, to make sure it's, statistically sound. Okay, so easy research to do. They just had to mark off a plot in which you have leaves on, let the leaves fall, and then right beside that, do an area, mark off the same area, rake off the leaves, and then observe that lawn over the next, I think they did probably 6 years or so. Again, here's what they found. The lawn area in which the leaves were mulched on in, and when I say mulched on in, they did anywhere from about a 4 to 6 inch layer of leaves over the surface and mulched them in. And they had different plots. This one had 2 inches of leaves. This one had 4 inches. This one had 6 inches. Okay, the 6 inch, 4 inch, you maybe had to make multiple passes through. Okay, so they had these different plots with different heights. Okay, well, the plots in which the leaves were mulched down in over a period of years, here's the results. There were less weeds. It helped control weeds. When they dug up the grass, it had a better root system because that mulch helped conserve moisture. So it demanded less moisture, so the grass plants were healthier. And also, when they did soil temperatures, and of course, our grasses are cool season grasses. They thrive when it's cool. They don't like it when it's hot and dry. Okay, so the soil temperature was kept cooler in the areas that were mulched. And so anyway, after 6 years, also crabgrass was less in those, the mulched areas. So over 6 years, they determined that it was much more beneficial. Is that a word?
Yeah.
It was great things happened to your lawn if you just mowed the leaves right on in and mulched it in. They did have a couple of caveats. One was that after you're done mulching, that mulch, the crumbled up leaves, has to penetrate in after a day or two. If that material lays on the surface of the lawn, it does have to be removed because it would be blocking sunlight.
Okay.
So how has this affected people in our area? Well, I got so many emails that said, "Oh, thank God, we don't have to rake these leaves off and bag them up and haul them off. We can just mow over them, because not only is it saving work, it's giving benefit." Oh, one benefit that I didn't mention, as those leaves decompose into the turf soil, they're releasing nutrients. So you're also adding fertility, almost like adding good compost to the lawn. Anyway, so as people were experiencing this, I think I first wrote about this maybe 4 years ago, so there's been some track record of local people doing this. So anyway, I have, over the last year or so, been getting emails from people saying they have noticed the difference. They do it. In fact, they enjoy it so much and can see a benefit in the lawn. You know how leaves rarely lay evenly over your whole lawn. So they said, well, when the leaves get piled up here, they take their rake and throw the leaves over there so that it has a nice coating over the whole lawn so that they can mulch them in. So they're actively seeking to have leaves mulched in over their whole lawn. Because I've had quite a number of people that say they've become fans of that. Not only is it work saving, but they feel it's added benefit to their lawn.
So one thing this year, while we were talking about that when we had John Wheeler on earlier this year, this summer, he was saying that he's the one who pointed out that this may be a winter with not a lot of snow cover, which may be damaging for plants. So to add mulch, like we've been talking about, so you could rake your leaves up this year and use that as your mulch. Or maybe, you still go ahead and you mulch your leaves into your lawn, but maybe you find a neighbor or you find somebody else on your street who's got the bags of leaves out on the street, and you ask them politely, can I take your leaves and can I use them for mulch in my garden? This may be a year when leaves are kind of maybe in a little bit of demand.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm a taker. I'm a taker. I don't remove leaves off our property. I ask people can I have your leaves? If they're going to dispose of them anyway. Yeah.
Do they give you a funny
I'm a
look?
leaf taker. Yeah, I've been known even to show up at a compost where people are dropping off their leaves and say, "Oh, well, if you're going, may I have those bags of leaves?" Yeah.
And if they're dry leaves, they're not heavy. They're easy to handle.
They are.
Maybe I'll do that. Maybe we don't have a lot of trees in our yard, so maybe I'll bring some over, spread them around the yard, and mow them in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. Huh. Yeah, so it's been such a fun and beneficial thing. But I would much rather just mow over leaves than rake and bag. I will admit, though, I miss the smell of burning leaves when we used to burn as a kid, because you could just burn them in the alley, behind your house in Lisbon, which, of course, not a good fire.
Frowned on now.
Yeah, and that's not a good thing for house fires. But, that smell of burning leaves was awfully good. But since we can't do that anymore, let's mulch them in, use them for mulch.
Hey, how should we protect young trees in the yard? Because I had trees and shrubs. Last year we talked about that there was a fair amount of rabbit damage done to trees and shrubs. What's the best way to protect those?
And for trees, definitely tree wrap, especially fruit trees, because as we mentioned, they have that sweetness inside their bark that rabbits and deer just love. They hunger for that when there's nothing else in the winter landscape to eat. They'll go for that. So anyway, a tree wrap. Now, the tree wrap that I especially like, so for fruit trees, even as they get older, or younger trees that, even if they aren't fruit trees, wrap. Well, the wrap that I especially like is from the garden center, the rolls of wrap that you physically attach at the bottom and then you roll them up. So I'm not sure I'm describing that very well, but instead of the tubes, the white plastic tubes that you try to squeeze around a tree.
They've slit down one side and like a C, and you open them up and they kind of clamp around.
They clamp around. Sometimes they're a little hard to get around. I've scraped a little bark when I've tried to get those kind of around, and I like the rolls. I guess I don't know how else to describe them other than they're a roll. and you spiral that up the tree trunk, kind of overlapping a little. And the nice thing about those is you can go as high as you want. So you can bring that through the upper branches, the sturdy branches where they join the trunk. And of course, we had this problem last year with so much snow, the rabbits could get up over the tree. And in some cases, if they got some of those main branches, of course, those branches died. So you can kind of snake that roll of wrap up into the tree a little better than just a tree tube.
Now, is that wrap, kind of constricting? Because that's one thing that you don't want to do with a tree. You never want to choke it,
Exactly.
You don't want to. So does the wrap allow for some space around it, or does it grow with it?
Yeah. And, of course, that's a wonderful point. That's why tree wraps are put on in the fall, kind of when the growing season is done. So about November 1st, we should have our tree wraps on.
Okay.
And a nice day in October would be a good day to do those. They could go on the end of September if you want. But anyway, they should be in place over winter, and then they should be removed in spring so that the tree will expand. And that's true with the white tree tubes or the wrap that I mentioned that spirals on up around the tree trunk. So any of those should be removed because definitely they can constrict. Not just the type I described, but also the tree tubes can definitely constrict. Have you ever noticed some trees, maybe they're even in commercial areas, whereas the tree grows, that white tube is still kind of hugging around that
Kind of like
tree.
somebody who no longer fits into a T-shirt.
Precisely. I love it. And they can definitely adversely affect that tree.
How about bushes, tender bushes that maybe are young? I know last year we had rabbits got to our burning bush really early.
That is winter candy for rabbits, the burning bush, the euonymus. They love it. Isn't it interesting how rabbits must be able to smell some of that because they will, certain things, they won't gnaw down a potentilla, but they will go to the burning bush right beside it. And so we could do repellents such as liquid fence, plant skid, or Repellex are probably the three that have the most widespread success, but no repellents are going to be 100%. And so the best is really a physical barrier such as a fence. So if I had a burning bush, I did have, but the rabbits killed it. So if I'm going to replant a burning bush, this time I'm going to fence around it. It's more work. Even an older burning bush usually needs some protection or some repellent applied to it because even an older one, they will totally decimate.
When do you think you should put the repellent on?
The repellent on should be about the time that snow looks like it's coming. And because the repellents don't last too long, so you don't want to put it on too early. And before the snow comes, rabbits usually find enough other things. There's still green grass, there's some clover, there's some kind of weeds that they like. There are different things, our hosta. There are different things for them to nibble on other than going after our shrubs. And so it's usually after everything else is covered with snow or the greenery frozen, they start looking for the twigs to gnaw on.
One of the things that we need to clean up in the fall is all of the various pots that we have outside, whether we have, kind of annuals or flower pots, things like that.
Containers are so, with good reason, they're so popular.
Yeah, and so the ones that you're not going to bring inside, that you're not going to overwinter inside, we should really clean those out because, of course, the soil in there, will freeze, it'll expand, it could crack those containers. So we know now that we can reuse this potting soil. My question for you, what's the best way to store potting soil? And also, how many seasons can we reuse it?
Well, Mary and I have reused some of our potting mix for 7 years or so, easily, and by starting with a good, high-quality potting mix, such as one of the top national brands or one that the garden centers recommend. So a good, high-quality potting mix instead of the cheap bargain brands. And usually the high-quality types are those with lots of peat moss and good aggregate, nice and fluffy, and just retain that structure. And so in the fall of the year, after frost or after you've brought any plants plants in, then it's important to remove any dead plant parts there. Sometimes I haven't gotten to that, and then next spring it's a little bit, depressing to see this old slimy plant still in that pot. And so it just helps to remove it in the as soon as things get frosted, then remove them. And also for disease or insect sanitation, to remove that old plant part. And then you can leave that soil in the pot if it's a pot type that wouldn't be damaged in freezing. But if it's a very expensive ceramic type pot that might crack with the freezing and thawing of that soil, because the soil is likely to get wet in our fall rains and maybe the first snow that's soggy. And so any ceramic pot that might break, it's better to take the soil out. Maybe store it in some pails or something. You could store it in the garage. But the soil is fine in a planter that won't crack. It's fine to leave it outside. In fact, I sometimes think that leaving that soil outside and exposed to the freezing and thawing probably helps kill some insect eggs and diseases.
So do you keep it like in a tote, or do you keep it in just like a pile?
We ourselves don't have any containers that would break. Most are kind of a decorative plastic type.
Okay.
Or there's a better name for plastic, but that term escapes me. Anyway, our unbreakable type of pots, we leave the soil in and leave them out. We don't take that soil out. And then next year, we take out about a fourth of it in the spring and add good fresh soil. And then also it's going to need fertility the next year too, because the fertility would have been used up this growing season.
All right. One last question is, what do we do about voles? Voles can do a lot of lawn damage in the winter, and if you're not keeping an eye on it, you may just find that in the spring, all of the tunnels or the damage they've done to your lawn. Is there anything preventive to do with voles?
It's always kind of a surprise when the snow disappears and the lawn is exposed. And I always breathe a sigh of relief when that snow disappears and I look at the lawn, and if I don't see any of these channels going all the way through, I just breathe a sigh of relief. Some years, when the snow disappears, I've got all these nuisance channels throughout the lawn where the voles have worked under the snow all winter long. And so what can we do? Okay, there are vole, mole, and rodent repellents that could be spread around the yard in the fall, kind of right before snow probably sets in. Any repellents have mixed results. Sometimes they'll work in some locations, sometimes they won't. I've had mixed results with vole repellents. We don't have young kids and pets in our yard, so I've opted for rodent poison. What I do is put it inside tubes of PVC pipe. Voles seem to like to tunnel, and they'll go into that tube as a tunnel, and then if I tuck the poison, I like little packs of poison, and then I'll tuck that inside the tube, and then the voles will usually go in and nibble that. So sometimes I'll put this in areas I kind of suspect the voles are going to be coming from. For example, those voles seem to go to the perimeters of your yard in the summer and fall. They're hiding out somewhere. And, maybe under a deck, maybe alongside or under a little shed. But anyway, I try to put them in areas where I think they might be harboring and get those out sometime this fall, and certainly before snow flies. And another thing a person could do is maybe try traps, little rodent mouse type traps baited with peanut butter. Some people have caught lots of them that way. And of course, voles are the little brown or grayish brown short-tailed field mice, and such a nuisance. And so anyway, trying to get something down before snow sets in seems to be the key. Most of our lawns do recover, but they will also go for little trees and shrubs and girdle the area right at the base of the tree, and then many times it'll kill that tree or shrub.
All right. Well, we certainly have a lot of things on our checklist to do now. Hopefully it's not too daunting for people. But if you kind of do these a little bit by bit, you'll be set come about mid-November, ready to look forward to all the things that you're going to plant and all the yard work to do.
And it's kind of fun
spring.
to choose some nice days in the fall, choose some nice days and do these tasks, and it's pleasant work.
All right, Don. So if people have any questions for you about anything that we've talked about or anything coming up, what's the best way to reach you?
Best way is to give me an email, and the address is donald.kinzler. I'll spell that, Kinzler, donald.kinzler at ndsu.edu. And if there are any issues that where a photo would help, feel free to email a photo too.
And remember to go on the Forum's website, look for the Forum Best Bets of the Red River Valley, vote for Don for Best Columnist, and vote for this podcast, Growing Together, for favorite podcast. And we appreciate that very much.
Yeah, we appreciate all our listeners. And this is a highlight of my week, coming in here to discuss gardening. And so thanks to everyone who's listening.
All right. Well, Don, we'll see you next week.
We'll see you. Thank you.